The rain didn't just fall on Baltimore that night, it waged war. It hammered against the thin glass of the row house window, each drop a tiny fist trying to break in. For Nia Williams, the storm outside was a perfect mirror for the one raging inside her. 3 days. For 3 agonizing days, the house had been steeped in a silence so profound it felt louder than any argument. The silence where her husband, Jordan Reed, was supposed to be. Nia lay in bed, the sheets tangled around her legs, a cold and empty space beside her. She was a nurse at Johns Hopkins, accustomed to long shifts and the quiet hum of machinery keeping people alive. But this silence was different. It was a dead, waiting silence, filled with the ghosts of their last fight. "It was the rent money, Jordan, all of it," she had screamed, the useless, flimsy debit card trembling in her hand. He had stood there, leaning against the kitchen counter with that familiar cocktail of guilt and defiance swimming in his eyes. He was a good man, or he had been, a proud man who once hauled cargo at the port of Baltimore, his hands strong, his laughter easy. But when the layoffs came, something inside him had crumbled, and he'd tried to rebuild his pride with poker chips and losing lottery tickets. "I can get it back, Nia. I have a plan," he'd mumbled, the faint scent of whiskey on his breath. "A plan? Your plans are digging our grave," she'd shot back, her voice raw with exhaustion from working double shifts to keep them afloat. "Another loan from Alonzo Diaz? Do you have any idea what they call him? The ghost. Because people who owe him money just disappear." His face had hardened, the guilt evaporating into pure, stubborn anger. "Don't start, Nia. Just don't." He grabbed his worn leather jacket. "If you walk out that door, Jordan, don't bother coming back." The words had tasted like ash the moment she said them, but she couldn't take them back. He had paused at the door, his shoulders slumped. He didn't turn around. "Maybe that's for the best," he'd whispered, and then he was gone, swallowed by the Baltimore night. That was 3 days ago. The jarring ring of the telephone sliced through the storm's fury at 3:14 a.m. Nia's heart seized in her chest. Calls at this hour were never messengers of good news. They were harbingers of tragedy, delivering finality in cold, official tones. With a hand that shook, she reached for the phone on her nightstand. "Hello?" Her voice was a dry rasp. "Is this Mrs. Nia Williams?" The man's voice was deep, gravelly, and devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of someone long past being affected by the bad news he delivered. "Yes, this is she. This is Detective Frank Costello of the Baltimore Police Department. I'm sorry to be calling at this hour, ma'am." He wasn't sorry. It was a line, a piece of procedural script. "We need you to come down to the city morgue." The world tilted on its axis. Morgue. The word sucked all the air from her lungs, from the entire room. The storm outside faded to a dull roar. What's happened?" she managed to ask, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. "We found the body of a John Doe in an abandoned warehouse over in the Curtis Bay area. The description we have, what's left of it, is consistent with your husband's missing persons report. We need a positive identification." Nia sank onto the edge of the bed, the room spinning. The body. What's left of it? John Doe. These were words from TV shows, from the grim stories whispered in the hospital break room. They weren't words that were supposed to be about Jordan, her Jordan. The man who'd held her hand at her mother's funeral, who could make her laugh so hard her sides ached. "Mrs. Williams, are you still there?" Costello's voice was impatient, a man with a caseload to clear and little time for a widow's shock. "Yes," she whispered, the sound barely audible. "Yes, I'll be there." Hanging up, she sat motionless in the dark, the echo of the detective's words bouncing off the silent walls of her home. The fight, his whispered, "Maybe that's for the best," the 3 days of agonizing silence. It had all been leading to this, to a sterile room and a metal slab. A cold dread, heavier and more certain than any fear she had ever known, settled over her. She was no longer a wife waiting for her husband to come home. She was a woman on her way to identify his body. The drive to the morgue was a surreal journey through a city washed in neon and sorrow. The rain-slicked streets of Baltimore reflected the traffic lights in long, bleeding strokes of red and green, colors that felt garishly alive in a world that had just died. The city morgue was a brutalist block of concrete and soulless windows, a building designed to contain grief, not comfort it. It looked exactly as cold and unforgiving as Nia felt. Detective Frank Costello was waiting for her just inside the entrance. In person, he was exactly as his voice had suggested. A man worn down by the city's endless cycle of violence. He was thick-set, with weary, cynical eyes, a cheap suit that had seen better decades, and the faint scent of stale coffee clinging to him. "Mrs. Williams, thanks for coming in," he said, his tone flat. He didn't offer a hand or a word of sympathy. He just turned and gestured for her to follow. "This way." The hallway was long, sterile, and bathed in the humming, antiseptic glare of fluorescent lights. With every echoing step of her shoes on the linoleum floor, Nia's legs felt heavier, as if they were wading through setting concrete. As a nurse, she'd been in morgues before. She knew the smell of formaldehyde and the profound, chilling stillness. But it was one thing to be there as a professional, a detached observer. It was another thing entirely to walk this hall toward her own personal abyss. "I need to prepare you," Costello said, his voice a low rumble without looking at her. "The victim sustained significant trauma. The face is not in good shape. Looks like a gambling debt gone bad. Happens all the time in this part of town. We find them a few times a month." The casual cruelty of his words, the way he'd already categorized and dismissed Jordan as just another statistic, sent a flash of anger through Nia's grief. This part of town, cases like these. He was talking about her husband, not a file number. But she said nothing, just pressed her lips into a thin, tight line and nodded. They stopped before a door with a small sign that read, "Viewing Room." Costello paused, his hand on the handle. "You sure you're up for this? We can use dental records, but it takes days. This is faster." He wanted it over with. Another closed case. "I'm sure," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The room was colder than the hallway. Behind a large pane of glass, a metal gurney held a form covered by a stark white sheet. A pathologist in blue scrubs stood beside it, his expression professionally neutral. "This is Dr. Evans," Costello grunted. "He'll assist." Nia's eyes were fixed on the shape under the sheet. It was long and still, so impossibly still. She took a deep breath, the chemical scent burning her nostrils, and nodded at the doctor. He moved with practiced efficiency, pulling back the sheet to reveal the head and torso. Nia recoiled, a gasp catching in her throat. Costello hadn't been exaggerating. The man's face was a grotesque mask of swollen, bruised flesh and dried blood. It was unrecognizable, a testament to a brutal final explosion of violence. Her mind screamed, "That's not him. It can't be." But then, her training, her nurse's eye for detail, took over. Through the gruesome wreckage, she saw the strong line of his jaw, the stubborn set of his chin, and there, just beneath the jawline on the right side, was a faint, silvery line, a scar. Can I see his right hand?" she asked, her voice a trembling whisper. Costello nodded to the pathologist. Dr. Evans gently pulled the sheet further down, exposing a bruised arm. Nia's breath hitched. There, on the back of the hand, just below the knuckles, was a jagged, pale scar. She was 12, and he was 14 when he'd been trying to fix the chain on her bicycle. His hand had slipped, caught in the gears. She remembered holding a wad of paper towels to the wound, her own tears mixing with his blood. "And the forearm," she choked out. The doctor exposed the rest of the arm, and there it was. Inked into his skin was the symbol of their life together, a simple black anchor for his love of the port, intertwined with a heart. In the center were their initials, N and J. He'd gotten it on their 5th anniversary, a spontaneous, slightly drunken decision on a warm summer night in Fells Point. They had been so happy then, so full of hope. The room began to swim, the floor tilted beneath her feet. "That's him," she whispered, reaching out a hand to brace herself against the cold glass. "That's my husband. That's Jordan." Costello moved to her side, his grip surprisingly firm on her elbow as he guided her to a chair. "You need some water?" She shook her head, unable to speak. The image of the tattoo, of that scar, was burned into her mind. It was him. All her frantic, desperate hope of the last 3 days crumbled into the dust of certainty. He was gone. "We'll be in touch, Mrs. Williams," Costello said, handing her a business card as she shakily got to her feet a few minutes later. He had what he needed. His John Doe had a name. But frankly, he added, his voice dropping to a confidential, weary tone, cases like these, with the people he was involved with, they don't often get solved. You should prepare yourself for that. He was already closing the book on Jordan Reed. To him, this wasn't a tragedy. It was just another Tuesday night in Baltimore. Returning to the row house was like stepping into a mausoleum. The silence she had fled from was now amplified, weighted with the absolute finality of the morgue. Every object, Jordan's muddy work boots by the door, his favorite mug in the dish rack, the indentation on his side of the sofa, was a fresh stab of pain. He wasn't just gone for the night. He was gone forever. Nia collapsed onto the sofa, the detective's business card falling from her numb fingers. She didn't cry. The shock was a dam holding back a flood of grief she knew would eventually break and drown her. It was in this state of suspended agony, less than an hour later, that a key turned in the front door lock. For a wild, irrational second, her heart leaped. Jordan. But it was Layla Monroe who stepped inside, her face a mask of practiced concern. Layla, her best friend since they were kids sharing secrets and dreams on a playground in West Baltimore. She held a paper bag radiating the warm, savory scent of food from their favorite carry-out spot. "Oh, honey." Layla dropped the bag on the coffee table and rushed to Nia's side, enveloping her in a tight hug. "I called and you didn't answer. I got so worried. I heard the news on the police scanner at the bar. I came as soon as I could." Nia let herself sag into the embrace. The simple human contact, a momentary anchor in her spinning world. For years, Layla had been her rock. She was the fiery, life-of-the-party yin to Nia's quiet, steady yang. While Nia had pursued a stable nursing career, Layla had drifted, finally settling into a bartending job at a popular, dimly lit dive in Fells Point, a place Jordan had started frequenting. "He's gone, Layla," Nia whispered into her friend's shoulder. "They found him. It's real." "I know, baby, I know. I'm so sorry," Layla murmured, stroking her hair. She pulled away, her eyes glistening with what looked like tears. "I brought you some food. You have to eat something." They sat in the oppressive silence of the living room, Layla fussing over Nia, unpacking containers of shrimp-fried rice and egg rolls. She chattered on, filling the void with memories of Jordan in his better days, stories of his goofy laugh and his big heart. It should have been comforting, but something was wrong. A strange, discordant note played beneath her friend's symphony of sympathy. Layla couldn't sit still. Her fingers nervously shredded the paper napkin in her lap. She kept glancing at the expensive-looking watch on her wrist, a recent purchase she'd been vague about. And most unnervingly, she wouldn't meet Nia's eyes for more than a second at a time. Her gaze kept darting around the room, as if looking for something or someone. "The detective? He said it was about debts," Nia said, her voice flat. "He mentioned Alonzo Diaz." Layla froze for a fraction of a second, her fork hovering over a container. "The ghost? Oh God, Nia. I told Jordan to stay away from him." "You knew he was borrowing from Diaz?" Nia asked, a flicker of surprise cutting through her haze of grief. "Well, yeah," Layla said, a little too quickly. "I mean, everyone knows Diaz runs the action in this town. He'd sometimes talk at the bar. He mentioned he was in deep, needed a big score to get clear. Said Diaz's interest was like 20% a week." She shoveled a bite of rice into her mouth, suddenly fascinated by her plate. A tiny alarm bell went off in the back of Nia's mind. 20% a week. It was such a specific, chilling detail. A detail Jordan had confessed to her in a moment of drunken despair, begging her not to tell a soul. How would Layla know that? "Why didn't you tell me it was that bad?" Nia pressed, her gaze sharpening. "I didn't want to worry you more than you already were." Layla's response was swift, defensive. "Jordan made me promise. He was so ashamed, Nia. He said he had a plan to fix everything. He was always talking about his plans." Her tone was plausible, but the look in her eyes was shifty. It was the same look Jordan got when he was lying about a losing poker hand. "When was the last time you saw him, Layla?" Layla's gaze flickered to the clock on the wall. "Oh, God, I don't know. A few days ago? A week? He stopped by the bar for a quick drink after well, you know. He seemed distracted, agitated." She pushed her food around, her appetite suddenly gone. Before Naya could ask another question, Layla stood up abruptly, gathering the containers with frantic energy. "Listen, honey, I've got to run. I have to open the bar in an hour, but I'll call you tomorrow, okay? We'll get through this. You're not alone." She gave Nia another quick, tight hug that felt more like a restraint than a comfort. And then she was gone, leaving behind the scent of her strong perfume and a lingering, profound sense of unease. Nia sat alone in the quiet, the smell of uneaten food filling the air. Her friend's visit, meant to be an act of love, had left her feeling colder and more isolated than before. There was the specific detail about the debt, the constant glances at her watch, the inability to meet her eye. It was nothing she could prove, nothing she could even properly articulate. But a small, cold seed of doubt had been planted in the barren soil of her grief. Something about her best friend's story didn't add up. The next 2 days were a blur of suffocating logistics. Nia moved through a fog, making the calls one is never prepared to make. A funeral home, Jordan's estranged father in Florida, the HR department at her hospital, her voice a monotone as she requested bereavement leave. Each conversation was a fresh confirmation of the nightmare. Jordan was dead. The world kept turning, demanding paperwork. Layla called and texted constantly, her messages overflowing with heart emojis and offers of help. "Thinking of you, sweetie. Let me know if you need anything at all. Don't forget to eat. I can drop something by." The performance of the grieving best friend was flawless, almost too flawless. The unease Nia had felt after Layla's visit lingered, a low-grade fever in the back of her mind. She politely declined the offers, craving solitude more than her friend's increasingly cloying sympathy. She spent hours just sitting in the living room, staring at a framed photo on the mantelpiece. It was from their honeymoon in the Outer Banks 10 years ago. They were young, sun-kissed, and incandescently happy. Jordan's arm was slung around her, his smile wide and genuine. There was no hint of the darkness to come, no shadow of Alonzo Diaz, no ghost of the stranger he would become. Where did this man go? When did he die? Was it 3 days ago in a warehouse? Or had he been dying a slow death for years, right beside her? The call came on the third afternoon after the identification. The caller ID flashed Baltimore PD. Nia's stomach clenched. It was probably Detective Costello calling with an update she didn't want. That the case was cold, that there were no leads, just as he'd predicted. She let it ring 4 times before answering, steeling herself. "Hello? Mrs. Williams, it's Detective Costello." His voice was different this time. The weary boredom was gone, replaced by a strained, almost confused edge. "I have some new information regarding your husband's case." "Okay," Nia said, bracing for the worst. "We received the preliminary report from the medical examiner's office. We ran a blood panel on the victim." He paused, and in the silence, Nia could hear the rustle of papers. "According to the report, the deceased has a blood type of AB negative." Nia frowned, not understanding the significance. And, Costello continued, his voice tight, "I'm looking at the medical information you provided from your husband's file at Johns Hopkins. It says here, Jordan Reed's blood type is O positive. The world, which had been slowly and painfully settling into a new, grim reality, suddenly tilted again. What? That's not possible." "I'm aware of that, Mrs. Williams," the detective said dryly. "O positive is the most common blood type. AB negative is the rarest. It's not a clerical error you make twice. There's no way the man in the morgue is a biological match to the medical records of Jordan Reed." Nia's mind raced, trying to grasp the implications. A mistake? A mix-up at the hospital years ago? Or something else? "But the scar," she stammered. "The tattoo. I saw them. It was him." "People can have similar scars. Tattoos can be copied," Costello said, a new current of suspicion in his tone. He was no longer just a bored cop. He was a detective with a puzzle, and he didn't like puzzles. "Mrs. Williams, I need to ask you again, and I want you to think very carefully. How certain are you that the man you identified was your husband?" The question hung in the air, heavy and impossible. She had been so sure. The grief that had hollowed her out was real. But the science, the blood type, it was an immutable fact. Her certainty, once a rock-solid foundation of her sorrow, was now crumbling into sand. Could her grief have tricked her? Could she have wanted to see Jordan in that mangled corpse, just to have an end to the agonizing not knowing? I don't know anymore, she whispered, her voice cracking. Her entire reality was fracturing. If that man wasn't Jordan, then who was he? And more importantly, where was Jordan? As her mind reeled, a sudden heavy knocking rattled the front door. It wasn't a polite rap. It was a series of hard, insistent thuds, urgent and demanding. "Mrs. Williams?" Costello's voice crackled over the phone. "Is someone there?" The knocking came again, louder this time, shaking the door in its frame. A primal fear, cold and sharp, shot through her. It was too aggressive for a delivery man, too late in the day for a neighbor. Her mind instantly leaped to Alonso Diaz and his men. Had they come for her? "I have to go," she said into the phone, her eyes wide and fixed on the door. "Don't open that door, Mrs. Williams. I can have a patrol car there in 5 minutes," Costello commanded. But she wasn't listening. A voice from the other side of the door, muffled but distinct, called her name. A voice she had been mourning for 3 days. A voice she had just been told belonged to a man with the wrong blood type. Nia, open up. It's me. Please, let me in." It was the voice of Jordan Reed. Time seemed to warp and bend. Nia stood frozen in her living room, the detective's warning echoing in one ear and her husband's impossible voice pleading in the other. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and disbelief. It couldn't be. She had seen his body. She had mourned him. This was a trick of a grief-stricken mind, a cruel hallucination. "Nia, please, I'm hurt. They could still be looking for me." The voice was strained, filled with genuine panic. With trembling hands, Nia dropped the phone, the clatter on the hardwood floor shockingly loud in the tense silence. She crept toward the door, her breath held tight in her chest, and peered through the peephole. The distorted fisheye view showed a man's face, battered and swollen. One eye was puffed up, a deep purple bruise blooming across his cheek. A gash on his forehead was caked with dried blood. His clothes were torn and filthy. But underneath the dirt and the damage, it was him. It was Jordan's face. It was the face she had fallen in love with, the face she had just seen in ruins behind glass. Her mind short-circuited. Ghost. Hallucination. Miracle. None of the words fit. Acting on an instinct she didn't understand, she fumbled with the deadbolt, her fingers clumsy and numb. The lock clicked open. She turned the knob and pulled the door inward. Jordan Reed, the man she had identified in the morgue, stumbled across the threshold. He leaned heavily against the doorframe, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. He looked like he'd been through a war. The reality of him, the smell of rain, dirt, and fear, the sound of his labored breathing, was overwhelming, undeniable. "Oh my God!" Nia whispered, taking a staggering step back. "It can't be. I saw you. You were dead." "Nia!" He reached a hand toward her, his fingers scraped and bruised. She flinched away as if from a hot iron. The man in the morgue had been cold. The thought of his touch sent a wave of revulsion and confusion through her. "Don't touch me," she breathed, her back hitting the wall. "Am I losing my mind? Is this real?" "It's real, baby. It's me," he said, his voice hoarse. He winced as he moved, carefully shutting and locking the door behind him. Can I just sit down? I don't think I can stand much longer." Still reeling, Nia numbly pointed toward the sofa. He limped over and collapsed onto the cushions with a pained groan, burying his face in his hands. He looked broken, exhausted, and terrified. Nia remained by the wall, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to reconcile the two realities coexisting in her living room. The husband she had mourned, and the living, breathing man now sitting on her couch. "Explain," she finally said, her voice shaking. "Explain how you're here when I saw your body at the morgue." Jordan took a deep, shuddering breath and looked up at her. His one good eye was filled with a terror she had never seen before. "Diaz's men," he began, his voice low and raspy. "They grabbed me the night I left, 2 guys in a black van. They said the ghost wanted to talk. I knew what that meant." He paused, touching his bruised cheek gingerly. "They took me to some old abandoned warehouse down by the docks. Diaz was there. He was furious, said his patience had run out. Then they started working on me. He shuddered, the memory playing out in his eyes. They beat me, Nia. I thought I was going to die. I swear, I thought that was the end. Nia pressed a hand to her mouth, the image of the mangled face in the morgue flashing in her mind. Had that been meant for him? But how did you get away? She asked. It was a miracle, a fluke, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. They got a call, something about a shipment. They were distracted for a minute, arguing. The window was boarded up, but one of the planks was loose. I don't even remember thinking. I just kicked it out and jumped. It was only a one-story drop, into a pile of trash. I just ran, Nia. I ran like I've never run before. He looked at her, his expression pleading for her to believe him. I've been hiding out for days, in an old empty house. I was too scared to come home, too scared they'd follow me here and hurt you. I couldn't go to the police. You think they'd believe me? A broke gambler with a sheet of priors? They'd say I got what I deserved. But the body, Jordan, Nia insisted, stepping closer. The scar on his hand, the tattoo on his arm, it was our tattoo. How is that possible? Jordan frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. I don't know, Nia. I swear I don't. Maybe they found someone. Some poor homeless guy who looked a little like me. Maybe they did it to send a message. To you. To everyone else who owes them money. To show what happens. Diaz is a monster, Nia. He's capable of anything. His story was terrifying, filled with details that felt sickeningly real, and yet it felt too perfect, too cinematic, a desperate man's tale of a miraculous escape. As relief warred with a deep, unsettling skepticism, she remembered the phone call. The police, she said suddenly. I was on the phone with Detective Costello when you knocked. He told me the blood type from the body didn't match yours. Jordan's face went pale. He knows? You told him I was here? He asked, panic flaring in his eyes. No, I dropped the phone, but he's going to be suspicious. He told me not to open the door. We have to go, Jordan said, struggling to his feet. Now, before they come. If Costello finds me, he'll hold me, and Diaz's people will find out. They'll kill me, Nia. They'll kill us both. We have to run. He grabbed her arms, his grip surprisingly strong. I know I messed up. I messed everything up. But I'm alive. We have a second chance. Please, Nia, we have to go. His desperation was a physical force, pulling her in. But as he spoke of running, of a second chance, the small seed of doubt planted by Layla's strange behavior began to sprout, its roots twisting around the edges of Jordan's frantic story. Something was terribly wrong. The air in the small row house crackled with a new kind of tension. It was no longer the quiet of grief, but the charged silence of a standoff. Jordan, desperate and pleading, stood in the center of the room, a living ghost urging her to flee. Nia, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and suspicion, remained rooted to the spot. I'm not running anywhere, Jordan, she said, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. She pulled her arms from his grasp. If you're telling the truth, you have nothing to fear from the police. You're a victim. A victim? He scoffed, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping his lips. Nia, look at me. I'm a black man with a gambling problem and a rap sheet for petty theft from 10 years ago. Look at him. Costello is a white cop who's already written this off as gang trash cleaning itself up. Who do you think he's going to believe? He'll see me as a suspect in something, not a victim of anything. Guys like me don't get the benefit of the doubt. That his words struck a painful chord of truth. She'd seen it in Costello's eyes, the easy dismissal, the weary prejudice. Jordan was right about how the world, and men like Costello, would see him. It was a card he played masterfully, blending a harsh reality with his own desperate narrative. But was he using that truth to hide a lie? Before she could answer, the sharp, authoritative rap of knuckles on the front door made them both jump. It wasn't the frantic pounding of Jordan's arrival. It was the confident, patient knock of the law. Baltimore PD, a familiar voice called out. Mrs. Williams, open the door. I know you're in there, and I have a feeling you're not alone. Jordan's face contorted in panic. Nia, don't. We can go out the back. And go where? Live life on the run? I won't do it. She squared her shoulders and walked to the door, her heart a cold, heavy lump in her chest. She opened it to find Detective Costello standing on her stoop, his expression unreadable. Behind him, a uniformed officer stood impassively. Costello's eyes immediately flicked past her to Jordan. He took in the bruises, the torn clothes, and the fear in Jordan's eyes. A slow, cynical smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Well, I'll be," he said, stepping inside without an invitation. "The ghost of Baltimore. Mr. Reed, I presume? You look a little worse for wear, but considerably better than the guy I saw on a slab downtown." "It was a mistake," Jordan said quickly, trying to sound defiant, but coming across as cornered. "They mistook someone else for me." "Mistakes were made, that's for sure," Costello drawled, his gaze sweeping the room. "So, you want to tell me your story? And make it good. I just wasted 2 days of department resources on a dead man who isn't dead." Jordan recounted his tale of kidnapping and escape, his voice filled with practiced urgency. He described the warehouse, the beatings, the miraculous getaway. Costello listened without interruption, his head tilted slightly, a small black notebook in his hand. He didn't write a single word. When Jordan finished, the detective remained silent for a long moment, the cynical smile never leaving his face. "That's quite a story," he finally said. "Sounds like a movie. Thing is, I've been a cop in this city for 30 years, and stories that sound like movies are usually, well, movies." He turned to Nia. "Your husband mentions he was hiding out in an abandoned house. Did he say where?" "Behind the old shipyard," Jordan interjected. "A boarded-up place on the corner of Pennington and First." Costello nodded slowly. "Convenient." He pulled out his phone. "You know, Mr. Reed, I'm a simple man. I believe in things I can see and touch, and sometimes things I can smell." He spoke into the phone. "Yeah, it's Costello. Bring him in." A few minutes later, another police cruiser pulled up. A uniformed K-9 officer stepped out, leading a magnificent German shepherd on a short, sturdy leash. The dog was all business, its movements sharp and focused, its intelligent eyes scanning everything. A vest on its back read BPD K9 Unit Rocco. "This is Officer Miller and his partner, Rocco," Costello announced. "Rocco here has a nose that doesn't lie. It doesn't tell stories, and it doesn't get confused. We're going to take a little ride down to that warehouse you mentioned, Mr. Reed. I'm going to give Rocco a piece of your clothing, and if your story is true, he should be able to confirm your scent was all over that place you were hiding out in." Jordan's face went a shade paler. He looked from the stoic dog to Costello's smug face. It was a brilliant move. A human witness could be mistaken or intimidated. A dog's nose was scientific, impartial evidence. "You're coming with us, of course," Costello said, gesturing toward the door, "just to make sure we've got the right spot." Nia watched as Jordan was escorted out, not in handcuffs, but flanked by officers in a way that made it clear he was not free to go. He shot her one last look over his shoulder, an expression of pure, cornered desperation. Her mind was a battlefield. Part of her prayed the dog would corroborate his story, that this whole nightmare was a bizarre, twisted misunderstanding. But another, colder part of her, the part that had listened to Layla's nervous chatter and Jordan's too-perfect story, suspected that Rocco the German shepherd was about to tear her husband's tail to shreds. The drive to the abandoned property was a tense, silent affair. Nia had insisted on coming, a decision Costello had grudgingly allowed. She followed the 2 police cruisers in her own car, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. She needed to see this through, to witness the moment her husband's story was either validated or destroyed. The house Jordan had described was a sad, collapsing relic from another era. It stood on a forgotten corner lot, overgrown with weeds, its windows boarded up like blind eyes. The air here was thick with the smell of salt and decay from the nearby Patapsco River. It was the perfect place to disappear, or to hide a terrible secret. Costello handed the K-9 officer a T-shirt they'd taken from Nia's laundry basket. "All right, Miller, let's see what Rocco has to say." Officer Miller let the German shepherd sniff the shirt intently, then gave a quiet command. "Such," he said. "Seek." With a low whine of excitement, Rocco went to work. He moved with a breathtaking efficiency, his nose skimming inches above the ground. He circled the dilapidated porch, then darted to the side of the house where a single plank had been kicked out of a boarded window, just as Jordan had described. The dog pushed his head through the opening, sniffing the air inside, and then let out a sharp, affirmative bark. Jordan, standing beside Costello, let out a visible sigh of relief. "See, I told you. That's where I jumped out." Officer Miller nodded. "He's got the scent. It's strong here." Nia felt a dizzying wave of hope. Could it be true? Had she been wrong to doubt him? Maybe he really was just a victim, a man who had miraculously survived. But Costello looked unimpressed. "Okay, he was here. Let's go inside. Be careful. Place is a wreck." An officer pried the rest of the boards off the door, and they stepped into the musty darkness. The inside of the house was a disaster of fallen plaster, rotting floorboards, and the lingering smell of damp and vermin. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the roof, illuminating swirling dust motes. Miller gave Rocco the command again, and the dog began to sweep the main room. He moved past a pile of trash in one corner, confirming Jordan's scent on a discarded water bottle and a candy bar wrapper. It all lined up. "Looks like your husband's telling the truth, Costello," Officer Miller remarked, sounding convinced. But Rocco wasn't finished. Instead of signaling that the job was done, he moved toward the far wall of the room, his body tense with focus. He stopped over a section of the dusty hardwood floor, his tail straight and rigid. He sniffed intently, then began to whine, a low, insistent sound. He pawed at the floorboards, then looked back at his handler and let out a series of short, sharp barks. It was a different kind of bark, not a confirmation, but an alert. "What's he got, Miller?" Costello asked, his curiosity finally piqued. "It's a strong scent, but it's concentrated. He's indicating something under the floor," Miller said, trying to pull Rocco back, but the dog was insistent, scratching at the wood with his claws. Jordan, who had been looking more and more relieved, now seemed to tense up again. "It's probably just rats, or a dead animal." "Rocco is trained to ignore animal scents," Miller said flatly. "He smells something else?" Costello knelt, his knees cracking. He examined the floorboards where the dog was indicating. "These look loose." He pulled a crowbar from a toolkit in the hall and wedged the tip into a crack. With a loud screech of rusty nails, the board popped up, followed by another. They all peered into the dark, shallow space beneath. At first, it looked like nothing but dirt and cobwebs. The uniformed officer shone his flashlight into the hole. The beam landed on a small, bundled-up cloth. Costello reached in with a gloved hand and carefully lifted it out. He unwrapped the cloth on the floor. Inside was not a weapon or drugs, as Nia might have expected. It was a cheap Buzz-style tattoo gun, the kind you could buy online for $50. Beside it were two small, half-empty bottles of black ink, a packet of sterile needles, and a few alcohol wipes. And tucked beneath it all was a small, disposable flip phone. A burner. A dead silence fell over the room, broken only by Rocco's soft panting. The air grew thick and heavy. Nia stared at the objects, her mind refusing to connect the dots. A tattoo gun? Why would a man running for his life hide a tattoo gun under the floorboards? Costello looked from the tattoo kit on the floor to Jordan's arm, where the anchor and heart tattoo was visible beneath his torn sleeve. Then he looked at Jordan, whose face had gone ashen, his mask of the innocent victim finally shattering. "A tattoo gun, Mr. Reed?" Costello said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That's a funny thing for a kidnapping victim to have. It's almost like you weren't just hiding here. It's almost like you were working on something, or someone." The hope that had flickered within Nia just moments before was extinguished, plunged into an icy, terrifying darkness. The dog hadn't just found Jordan's scent, it had uncovered his lie. The interrogation room at the precinct was a small, cold box painted a sickening shade of beige. Nia sat across a metal table from Detective Costello, a styrofoam cup of bitter, lukewarm coffee untouched in her hands. She had been separated from Jordan the moment they returned from the warehouse. The mood had shifted from a potential victim investigation to a full-blown criminal inquiry. "The burner phone was clean," Costello began, sliding a folder onto the table between them. "No calls, no messages, bought for cash at a corner store a month ago. But the tattoo kit, that's the interesting part." He leaned forward, his cynical eyes locking onto hers. "Tell me about your husband's tattoo, Mrs. Williams, the anchor and heart." Nia recounted the story of their 5th anniversary, the happy, impulsive decision in Fells Point. "It was done professionally," she added, "at a real tattoo parlor, not with something like that." "Exactly," Costello said, tapping the folder. "The ME's office took a closer look at the tattoo on our John Doe. It's a crude imitation. The lines are shaky, the ink is unevenly distributed, and there's evidence of recent inflammation. It was an amateur job, done no more than a day or two before his death. Someone was trying to copy your husband's tattoo onto another man. The implication was monstrous. Nia felt a wave of nausea. While we were at the warehouse, Costello continued, I had a unit pick up your friend, Layla Monroe, just for a chat. He watched Nia's face for a reaction. Her name came up a few times. Jordan mentioned being at her bar. She showed up at your house right after the news broke. A little too convenient. Nia remained silent, the memory of Layla's shifty eyes and nervous energy solidifying into something more sinister. We put them in separate rooms, Costello said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. The classic dilemma. We told them both we found the tattoo kit. We told them both we knew the body in the morgue was not Jordan Reed, and then we dropped the bomb. He opened the folder. The top page was a copy of a life insurance policy. About 6 weeks ago, your husband took out a new life insurance policy for $250,000. The sole beneficiary is you, Nia. Nia stared at the document, her own name typed neatly on the beneficiary line. $250,000. Enough to pay off all their debts and start over. Enough to be a motive. I didn't know anything about this, she whispered, horrified. I believe you, Costello said, surprisingly gentle for a moment. But the pieces all fit. The insurance company's records show the initial inquiry call was made from a landline. We traced it. The call came from the Tipsy Anchor, the bar where Ms. Monroe works. The web was no longer just a suspicion. It was a thick, suffocating net. And Jordan and Layla were tangled in its center. Once they knew their stories weren't holding up, Costello went on, his voice hardening again, they started to sing, and you've never heard a more out-of-tune duet. They're both trying to pin it on the other. He described the scene, Jordan in one room, Layla in another, two separate symphonies of betrayal. Jordan claimed the whole scheme was Layla's idea. He said she was obsessed with him, that she saw the insurance money as their ticket out of Baltimore and away from Nia. He claimed Layla was the one who found a suitable body and that he only went along with it out of fear of Diaz and desperation for the money. He swore he never laid a hand on the victim, that he was only supposed to help with the tattoo and then lay low. Layla, meanwhile, painted Jordan as the manipulative mastermind. She claimed he'd been planning it for months, seducing her with promises of a new life together in some tropical paradise. She tearfully admitted to helping him, blinded by love, but she insisted Jordan was the one who found the man, brought him to the warehouse, and did what had to be done. She claimed she was just an unwilling accomplice to a murder he had orchestrated. So they admit it was a scheme, Nia said, her voice numb, to fake his death so they could get the insurance money. Oh, they admit the fraud, Costello confirmed. That much is clear. An affair, a pile of debt, and a $250,000 insurance policy. It's a story as old as time. But there's one part they're both conveniently fuzzy on. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping. The dead man. Neither of them is admitting to murder. He says she did it. She says he did it. Each of them is trying to paint the other as the killer and themselves as the poor, misguided fool who just got caught up in something over their head. The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her husband and her best friend. An affair, a plot, a conspiracy built on her grief. They hadn't just lied to her. They had planned to build their future on the foundation of her mourning, cashing in a check paid for by her tears. And somewhere in their twisted plan, a man had lost his life. A John Doe in the morgue, a pawn in their greedy, desperate game. Costello closed the folder. Right now, it's a he said, she said for the murder charge. But the fraud, the conspiracy, we've got them dead to rights on that. They're not going anywhere. He stood up, his work done for the moment. You can go home, Mrs. Williams. I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this. Walking out of the police station into the harsh afternoon sun, Nia felt nothing. Not relief, not anger, not even sadness. Just a vast, hollow emptiness where her life used to be. The house was no longer a home. It was a crime scene, a stage where Nia had been the unwitting lead in a tragedy directed by the two people she trusted most. Over the next few days, as the initial shock subsided, it was replaced by a cold, sharp-edged anger. An anger at Jordan for his weakness and deceit. at Layla for her venomous betrayal, and at herself for being so blind. Detective Costello called periodically with updates. The investigation was proceeding, and the picture was becoming clearer and uglier. "We've identified the victim," he told her over the phone one morning, his voice all business. "The man in the morgue was named Ricky Evans. Turns out he's Layla Monroe's first cousin." Nia sank into a kitchen chair. "Her cousin?" "Yep," Costello confirmed. "A distant cousin from a branch of the family nobody talked to. Lived down in Virginia, had a long history of drug addiction, been living on the streets for the last few years. According to his family, Layla reached out to him about a month ago, out of the blue. Said she heard he was having a tough time and offered him a bus ticket to Baltimore, a place to stay, a chance to get clean. They hadn't spoken in a decade. The calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. Layla hadn't just found a random homeless man. She had targeted her own blood, a vulnerable man who probably thought her offer was a lifeline, a miraculous act of kindness. Instead, she had lured him to his death. "She used him," Nia whispered. "Looks that way," Costello agreed. She and Jordan needed a body, someone with a similar build to Jordan, and more importantly, someone nobody would miss for a while, a forgotten man. Ricky Evans was the perfect candidate. The finality of it all began to sink in. Nia knew she couldn't stay in the house. It was poisoned with memories. She decided to pack a bag, maybe stay in a cheap motel for a while, just to breathe air that wasn't thick with lies. That afternoon, she opened the bedroom closet to get a suitcase from the top shelf. As she reached up, her arm bumped a large, forgotten cardboard box filled with old photo albums and college yearbooks. The box tipped and crashed to the floor, spilling its contents. Amidst the scattered photos of happier times, a small metal box she'd never seen before slid out from underneath a stack of albums. It was a simple cash box, the kind you'd buy at an office supply store. With a sense of dread, she picked it up. It was unlocked. She lifted the lid, her breath caught in her throat. Inside was a thick wad of cash, mostly hundreds and fifties, easily $5,000 or $6,000, wrapped in a rubber band. It was more cash than she'd seen in one place in years, but it was what was tucked beneath the money that made her blood run cold. 2 one-way airline tickets, from BWI Marshall Airport to San Jose, Costa Rica. The departure date was for the next day. The names on the tickets were Jordan Reed and Layla Monroe. Nia stared at the tickets, the flimsy paper feeling as heavy as lead in her hands. This was it, the final, irrefutable proof. This wasn't just a panicked scheme to get out of debt. It was a meticulously planned escape. They had a destination. They had a date. They had cash for a new life, a life built on her heartbreak and Ricky Evans's death. The plan had been to let her grieve, let her collect the insurance money they likely planned to pressure her for later, while they were already sipping cocktails on a beach somewhere, laughing at how clever they had been. Her hands shaking with a fury so pure it felt like ice in her veins, she carefully placed the cash box and its contents into a large Ziploc bag. She called Detective Costello. "I found something," she said, her voice tight and controlled. "I found their escape plan." She explained about the box, the money, the tickets. Costello listened intently. "Don't touch anything else. I'm on my way. I'll be there in 30 minutes to collect it as evidence. This could be what we need to break one of them." She had just hung up when her phone buzzed again. The name on the screen made her stomach clench. Layla. She must have made bail. Nia's first instinct was to ignore it, to let the hateful name burn on the screen until it went dark. But a different impulse took over. She wanted to hear her voice. She wanted to hear the lies one last time before the door slammed shut on their lives forever. She answered. "Nia? Oh, thank God you answered." Layla's voice was a frantic, tearful whisper. "I'm out on bail. My parents scraped everything together. Listen, I have to see you. I have to talk to you. You need to know the truth, the real truth, not the lies Jordan is feeding the cops." Nia thought of the airline tickets sitting on her coffee table. She thought of Detective Costello, already on his way. A cold, dangerous idea began to form in her mind. "Okay," Nia said, her voice chillingly calm. "Come over." 20 minutes. That's how long Nia had. 20 minutes until Detective Costello arrived, and 20 minutes for Layla to get here and walk into a trap. Naya placed the Ziploc bag containing the cash box and airline tickets squarely in the center of the living room coffee table. There would be no hiding, no pretending. She wanted Layla to see it the moment she walked in. She wanted to watch her face as she realized the full extent of her exposure. The doorbell rang, and Nia's heart gave a hard, painful thud. She took a deep breath, marshaling the icy calm she'd discovered within herself, and opened the door. Layla looked ravaged. The confident, glamorous woman Nia had known was gone, replaced by a haggard creature with red-rimmed eyes, disheveled hair, and clothes that looked like she'd slept in them. Her carefully constructed facade had been stripped away, revealing the desperate ugliness beneath. "Nia, thank you for seeing me," she began, her voice thick with fake emotion as she stepped inside. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on the coffee table. She froze. The bag with the money and the tickets sat there like an accusation. The color drained from her face. "You found it." "I found it," Nia confirmed, her arms crossed over her chest. The calm she felt was terrifying, absolute. "So you can spare me the performance, Layla. I know you and Jordan were planning to run away together. I know about Costa Rica." Layla sank onto the edge of the sofa as if her legs had given out. She stared at the tickets, her escape route, her entire future, sealed in a plastic bag. "It's not what it looks like, Nia." "Isn't it?" Nia's voice was devoid of warmth. "It looks like my husband and my best friend were having an affair. It looks like they decided to fake his death, let me grieve, and use $250,000 of insurance money to start a new life. And to do it, they murdered your cousin." "I didn't kill him!" Layla shrieked, her head snapping up. The tears in her eyes looked real this time, tears of panic, not sorrow. "It was Jordan. He brought Ricky to the warehouse. He was already gone. He told me Ricky had overdosed, that it was a tragic accident, but a golden opportunity for us. I did the tattoo. God, I know how that sounds, but I was scared. Jordan can be very persuasive." "And I'm supposed to believe you?" Nia asked, her voice dripping with contempt. "The woman who lied to my face while I was mourning a man you knew was alive? The woman who lured her own family member to his death?" "Because I loved him," Layla cried, the words tearing from her throat. "I loved him so much I was stupid. He told me he was miserable with you, Nia, that you were holding him back, that you didn't understand the pressure he was under. He said we were soulmates, that you were just an obligation." Each word was a poison dart, aimed to wound. A whole year, she'd said, a year of secret meetings, whispered promises, and shared laughter at Nia's expense. "And you?" Nia asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Did you ever think about me in all of this? I thought of you as my sister." "Of course I did," Layla whispered, her gaze dropping. "I hated myself every single day, but he had this hold on me." She looked up, her expression shifting. "But he used me, Nia. He was using me all along. The plan was for him to stay hidden. I was supposed to be your shoulder to cry on, and then we'd leave. But he came back here, to you. He was going to cut me out and keep you and the money. He threw me to the wolves to save himself." A flicker of doubt. Could Jordan have been that monstrous? But then Nia remembered the look of genuine shock on Jordan's face when Layla had appeared at the door a few days ago. It wasn't the reaction of a man who had just double-crossed his mistress. "You're lying," Nia said slowly, the pieces clicking into place. "Jordan didn't know you were coming that day. He was just as surprised to see you as I was. You're both liars, trying to pin the murder on the other." Layla stood up, and in an instant, her entire demeanor changed. The tears vanished. The feigned weakness evaporated, replaced by a hard, glittering rage. Her face became a mask of pure venom. "You know what the funny thing is?" she snarled, taking a step toward Nia. "I actually felt bad for you. I was the one who insisted he put the insurance in your name, so you'd have something to start over with. And you ruined it. It's all your fault." "My fault?" Nia stepped back, a primal alarm bell screaming in her head. "Yes, yours!" Layla's voice rose to a shout. "We could have been gone. You would have had your money. We would have had our freedom. Everyone would have won. But no, Saint Nia had to be so perfect, and Jordan had to come crawling back to you." Her hand shot out and grabbed a heavy crystal paperweight from a side table. It was a gift from Naya to Jordan on their first anniversary. "I've got nothing left to lose now," Layla hissed, her eyes wild. "I'm already looking at accessory to murder. What's one more charge?" She lunged. Nia reacted on pure instinct, years of nursing emergencies creating a split-second response. She sidestepped, and the paperweight whistled past her ear, crashing into the wall behind her. She didn't scream. She ran. She bolted for the kitchen, her mind racing. Knife. There was a knife block on the counter. She fumbled, her hand closing around the handle of the largest chef's knife. She spun around just as Layla appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face contorted with hate. "Put it down, Layla," Nia said, her voice shaking but her grip on the knife firm. "Costello is on his way. He'll be here any minute." Layla laughed, a chilling, unhinged sound. "A lot can happen in a minute," she said, advancing slowly. "You always were weak, Nia, always needing someone to protect you. Me, your parents, Jordan, but none of us ever really cared. We just tolerated you." The words were a brutal gut punch, but Nia held her ground. As Layla raised the paperweight for another strike, the front door of the house burst open with a splintering crash. "Baltimore PD! Drop the weapon, now!" Detective Costello stood in the doorway, his service weapon drawn and leveled squarely at Layla's chest. Two uniformed officers flanked him, their own guns raised. Layla froze, the paperweight held high, her face a canvas of pure, impotent fury. Her shoulders slumped in defeat, and the heavy crystal dropped from her hand, thudding onto the linoleum floor. The fight was over. Costello holstered his weapon and walked toward Nia, his eyes filled with a grim respect. "You okay, Williams?" One of the officers was cuffing Layla, who was already starting her next performance. "She attacked me. It was self-defense." Costello ignored her. He looked at Nia. "We decided not to wait. I had a bad feeling. And we put a recorder on you before you left the station, just in case. We heard everything." He gestured toward Layla being led away. Every last word. The trials were swift and merciless. The mountain of evidence, the airline tickets, the cash, the tattoo kit, and most damningly, Layla's own recorded confession during her attack on Nia, left little room for doubt. Layla Monroe, faced with the recording of her own venomous threats, was found guilty of the first-degree murder of her cousin, Ricky Evans. Her face remained a stony mask as the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She would die behind bars, a ghost in her own right, haunted by the life she had destroyed for nothing. Jordan Reed, in a deal to avoid a murder trial he would likely lose, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit insurance fraud and accessory after the fact to murder. He tried to cast himself as a victim of Layla's manipulation, a weak man led astray, but the judge saw through it, citing his callous disregard for his wife's emotions and his role in the desecration of a man's body. He was sentenced to 15 years in a state penitentiary. 6 months after the sentencing, Nia drove to the Maryland Correctional Institution. She needed one last thing before she could truly move on. She sat in the visitor's hall, a thick pane of plexiglass separating her from the man who was now a stranger. Jordan was thinner, his eyes hollowed out, the cocky defiance replaced by the dull resignation of a caged animal. "Nia," he said, his voice raspy through the speaker. "I didn't think you'd come." "I didn't either," she answered honestly. "I'm not here to forgive you, Jordan. I don't think I ever can. I'm here for me. I need to understand one thing." She looked him directly in the eye. "Why did you come back? You had the money, you had the tickets. You could have been gone." He looked down at his shackled hands on the counter, silent for a long moment. When he looked up, there was a flicker of something that might have been genuine shame. "When I was in that warehouse," he said slowly, "applying that tattoo to Ricky's arm, it was supposed to be a relief, the end of my problems, but it felt wrong, so wrong, and when I was hiding out, all I could think about was you, getting that call, going to the morgue, crying over a body that wasn't mine. I thought about the life we had before I ruined it, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't build my future on your pain. It was a moment of cowardice, maybe, or the first decent thing I'd done in years. I don't know, but I had to come back." Nia listened, not for the truth of his words, but for her own reaction to them, and she felt nothing. The emotional ties had been severed so completely that his confession was just noise. He was a chapter of her life, that was over. "Goodbye, Jordan," she said, and she stood up without waiting for a reply. She walked out of the prison, leaving him and their shared past behind the glass and the razor wire. She sold the row house, the place of so much love and so much pain, to a young couple just starting out. She quit her job at Johns Hopkins, packed her life into a small moving truck, and drove west, with no destination in mind other than away. The final scene of her old life was not of a courtroom or a prison, but of her car on an open highway somewhere in Ohio. The sun was rising, painting the sky in strokes of orange and pink. On her cheek was a faint silvery scar, a permanent reminder of Layla's attack. It was a mark of betrayal, but it was also a mark of survival. The lesson: the deepest betrayals often come from the hands we once held for comfort. They can shatter your world and hollow you out until you are nothing but a ghost in your own life. But in that emptiness, you can find a strength you never knew you possessed. Rebuilding from the ashes is a solitary, painful journey. But the life you build with your own two hands, on your own terms, is a fortress that no one can ever tear down again. Nia Williams had survived the ghosts of Baltimore, and for the first time in a very long time, she was free.